Alright, here. Today's lesson I'll be going over the materials you'll need for making your own pattern. Now, every leatherworker I've ever talked to has their own method of doing things. Some folks like using cardboard, others like using poster board. There's not really a right or wrong answer to any of it. I can only kind of go over what I use and why I use it, and kind of explain, exactly why it works for my style of doing things. But yeah. The first things first, we need a sketchbook, which in general it's I recommend to have 50 to 70 pound paper. Now I use a sketchbook specifically, not like a watercolor paper or anything like that, just for the fact that I found that watercolor paper is a little more brittle, so if it folds in half it likes to splinter on the back side of things, and it's just far less usable for what we're actually going for. 50 to 70 pound paper gives you enough rigidity so when you actually tape things down, they actually hold their shape decent. The only thing to bear in mind is the fact that leather can't fold like paper, so if you actually hit like a hard fold, you know leather's not going to be a fold to actually do that in general. But that's kind of what I use. I usually just go to like Michael's, Hobby Lobby, whatever, get the Stratham sketchbook 300. That does pretty good, along with pound for pound. It's 100 pages. It's kind of the best they're going to get as far as pricing, considering I tend to go through a lot of patterns. Like when I may do pattern making in general, there's a whole lot of like, I'm going to make this curve and it's put on my face, go, oh, that's awful, and I just throw it away, retrace it real quick with the right thing, go from there. So I kind of go through a lot of paper, so it's cheapest to go through that route on it. Along with as far as the actual sizing of the notebook, doesn't really matter, all personal preference. I use the 9x12s just for the fact that it fits in the backpack, so you can kind of take it wherever you like. Otherwise, big old sheets work best, and usually involves taping it together whenever you need the bigger pieces. Next on the list is you're going to need a tape. Now, I recommend Scotch Magic Tape, which I will say preface on all this, I have no sponsors or anything else, this is just what I use. But I use the Scotch Magic Tape just for the fact that it's easy to rip, so when you actually get into place and tape things down, you can very easily like, oh, that's terrible, and you just kind of like and just smoosh it through. Otherwise, the adhesive on it isn't terribly strong, so it works great on the sketch paper. So if you need to actually undo something, you can very carefully peel it off without ripping your page terribly much. It does set up the longer it goes, so if you actually do use magic tape, bear in mind the fact that if you need to take it off, do so within the first day. Anything after that, the adhesive on the tape is going to set up a little bit more and cure, and it's going to just take your paper with it. But until then, stuff works lovely for that. Next on the list, we've got a ruler. Now, ruler is kind of a generalized term on this one. A lot of it is like the previous lesson I did, we covered the measurements you'll need, like across, before ear to nose to before ear. That'll give you your kind of how big you need to go. So you basically use the ruler to kind of translate your measurements directly over. As far as straight lines, like, oh no, don't really use it for that. But as for straight lines in a pinch, I usually just fold a piece of paper and just run off of that. But we need to have our measurements, so when we actually make the masks or make whatever you're doing, you actually have a good, proper idea of what you're looking at. It's a good thing to have. But like I said, ruler, measuring device, whatever you got, whatever you need, as long as you can get those measurements, will work lovely. After that, we've got a fine point pen. There's no need to go fancy. I use just a regular, standard, everyday big pen. These do well. They've always done well by me. Then if you get them right, they're not gonna like smudge like crazy. But no, literally just a pen that you can get a nice clean line off of. You don't have to worry about it. After that, we've got the a marker. Now that one's kind of goofy, just for the fact that I figured this on a few years ago, and it's always fun to me. But I use the either a Sharpie or the Cobalt job site marker. Now I use these because they bleed like crazy. I'm talking like, you put this on paper, it's going through like 3 layers almost instantly. It's on your hand, it's all over the place. But that makes it great, absolutely lovely. So, because when I actually do my pattern making, a lot of times I'll have like my separate pieces taped onto one another. Then you just take the Sharpie and just, well, not on your face naturally, but you do a little pop. You figure out your stitching holes and your rivet holes. You can basically pop it on where it's going to go, and it bleeds through the first layer and goes to the second one. It doesn't go through Scotch tape. But it gives you the ability to actually figure out all of your drilling holes and all of your rivet holes, just boop, 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 and then you just kind of remember what you're doing and kind of go from there. But yeah, just a regular marker, something that bleeds through paper very, very quickly. So permanent markers work best for that. After that, we've got scissors. Scissors. I recommend a 8.5 inch, something around there. It's just long enough that you can actually do some nice swooping curves when you cut, but short enough that you can actually get into the nitty-gritty details. If you use like the big old crazy long ones, it's just they don't like the little work. Same thing with the little ones. You can't really get clean lines because you're just kind of like and just kind of jaggedly working your way through. It's a lot harder to get the nice swoopy curves. But the good 8.5 inch works. This is just Wisp brand. I like them, but I use bigger, heavier ones for my actual leather work. For paper, you don't really need anything like that. The only thing you have to bear in mind is when you're cutting sketch paper, you tend to get some, like, I guess, paper fiber hits the blade. So every now and then I just kind of run my fingers over and it starts resisting the cut a little more than it should. But those are the most, like, the most important ones as far as what you need for pattern making in general. I do have a few optional things which are handy, but it's not entirely necessary. They're just things you can do, you can have. But the optional is I've got shape templates. I don't use them that terribly often, but if you absolutely like, I'm a terrible artist. I suck. It's real bad. Everything's so super. I try to do a stick figure, the thing's squiggly. It's awful. For that, yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of things out there in the world that help you get those shapes you need. Usually good for like, oh, this is, about this, say the bottom quarter of it works great for hitting the under the chins. Same thing with like all the swoops. You just kind of pick the circle and just kind of get that edge that you need on it. There's all sorts of these kind of things. Some have a lot more curly Q guys. Other ones have like hard, like these are triangles. But you can get a whole bunch of them and kind of use them for whatever you need on what their shapes you're kind of figuring out in your pattern. But they're a nice little thing to have. I'm never gonna fault them, and they're great. After that, we start getting into the kind of even weirder, which is the brass paper fasteners and the single hole punch. That one, if you're using thicker paper in general and you want to like hardcore like figure out your rivet patterns in general, this guy in general is just it's oddly enough the scrapbooker's hole punch, which is just a slope smaller than just a regular like 3 hole punch kind of guy. It's like itty bitty tiny whiny. But I found it works. It's about the same size as a rivet, which works great for what we do. It just means I use punch in your holes, and then after that you use a brass fastener, paper fastener, pop them through, bend it. That gives you a nice proper like a stand-in for what your rivet's actually gonna look like. These guys in general, it's not bad. If you use them and get into that stuff, I probably would lean into like the thicker paper, like the 70 pound. The sketch paper I showed earlier is 50 pound, which they work for that, but my stuff tears a little bit too much for that, so I tend to get away with the marker, and I don't really use these guys unless I use the very thick stuff. But yeah, that's all I've got. That's all you'll need for the next steps. The next class will be going over actually how to make the pattern in general. So if you've been kind of paying attention, and if you've got your own design and everything else, absolutely let me know, and we'll kind of go from there. But yeah, next time we'll be covering kind of how to make patterns and how I make them, and yeah, we'll go from there. Yep. Have a good one. See you guys next time. Like, follow, whatever you feel like. Anyway.